Thank you for joining us today. We started out talking about how Jennifer Lopez is now going through with her third divorce with her husband, Anthony. And yes, my guest today, Mario Sukasa from the Theology of the Body Healing and Training Center in Florida, made a wonderful and beautiful point, which is they need our prayer. And we are going to end with a prayer for them today. But it is something that many of us are dealing with either personally, or we have family members, or maybe perhaps you grew up in a family that ended in divorce. And so it has become kind of the scourge and like the spiritual leprosy of our time, where we have this loss of dignity of human person, and even the loss of understanding what it means to love and to be loved. And I think that's truly what we're dealing with. Mario, thank you again for joining me on the show today. We just got done talking a little bit about the complementarity but equal in dignity of what it means to be made male and female, and how, not understanding the beauty of those things, or even what those things mean in terms of loving each other are. The second thing, can you expound a little bit to me about one of the second things that you think need to be addressed, so that we can help heal these wounds that are leading so many marriages to the divorce court?
Yeah, if we just follow the teaching of the theology of the body, John Paul II in his catechesis was so poignant to write and articulate just the key issues and the key questions that humanity was really dealing with at that time, and continues to wrestle with. A very prophetic text that he has written. In the first half, again, is speaking about the identity piece, which we just spoke about: who we are now, where we're going, who we were created to be, what we were created for. And then the second part of the catechesis really goes into this question of intimacy, and what really is the nature of the sacrament of marriage, and what are the dimensions of grace involved in it, and dimensions of the sign. And so in that, we're following that kind of analogy. You have to have intimacy before you have to have, identity. You have to know who you are, because before you can then offer yourself as a gift to the other. And that follows right along with, Eric Erickson's stages of psychological development, where he speaks about identity coming before intimacy. And I think that there's so much wisdom in that, that what happens when we don't know who we are, we don't come to a sense of that, we end up losing ourselves in relationships, because we end up expecting the other person to define that for us. And that becomes some areas of codependency. Or the opposite happens, where we then shy away from relationships altogether because of our hurt and because of our brokenness, kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that kind of stiff arm out. And we end up just shining people away, and we end up desiring independence more than the true harmony. What we're seeking for is the right balance of interdependence. What does it really mean to be of one flesh, but still be two bodies? Is the great mystery of the church. And so, when I work with engaged couples, or when I work with couples who are dating, and they ask me, when is it? How do you know when it's time to get married? How do you know if this is the right person? And the way I respond is, are you becoming more of the person that God created you to be in this relationship? Or are you finding that you're just losing yourself? And that's just a very poignant question, is that for the intimacy that we then have with our spouses, we are supposed to then grow more and more in that. And you know what? That process is hard, because there's a lot of conflict that comes into that. And it's not just peaches and cream and bed of roses. I mean, through the conflicts that happen in our relationships, John Paul II speaks about these moments. It's not just these times of conflict, these times of disconnect, are opportunities to engage the other person at a different level. They're opportunities to grow deeper in understanding of the other person, as we can seek to understand ourselves. So, what happens is we have to define what intimacy is, what it really means to love the other person. And again, love is not just an emotion, as I think we do so much, and we have to play on the word in our society. But love really is an action. It's a gift of the self to the other person. Like, you have to know what it is that you're giving to be able to give it away. You have to have a degree of self-possession before you know how to offer it to the other person.
Well, I want to break that into two pieces, because you're giving us two treasures right now, and I think for my audience, you and I, Mario, we get this, we've read this, we've studied this, but my audience might have never heard any of what we're talking about, and this is all kind of going over their head. So I want to chomp this up and give this in baby bites. Let's separate this between the first thing you were saying was that we're looking for other people to fill that void in us. And the other thing being what it means to be a gift of self. And I want to say, Pope John Paul II, he really foreshadowed it by helping us understand what the opposite of love is. And the opposite of love is not hate. Actually, it is what? It is using the other person.
Usury, absolutely.
And so
Usury.
you were telling me yesterday about how this society is so orchestrated and set up for use and consumption, and you know, it's almost normalizing many marriages. Poor you've got what's her name? I'm trying to think. Elizabeth. Why can't I think of her name? 13 marriages, 14. She just
Elizabeth
passed.
Taylor.
Yes, Elizabeth Taylor. That poor woman was desperate, I think, for love, union, and communion. And how many of us are all desperate for that? But when we, okay, let's look at that for a minute. What's going on in our society that we don't understand what it means to love, and that we somehow confused it with use and filling up a hole inside of us with things and people?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in a materialistic society, and in a society that defines ourselves primarily by what we do. So both those things kind of go hand in hand. You know, when you meet somebody in the elevator, you say, "What's your name?"
Yeah, yeah. Who are you? What did God put you here for? Yeah.
No, we don't. We say, "What do you do?"
What do you do?
So,
right.
And so when they define it, then we start talking about whatever that issue is. So we define ourselves so much by what we do. And so then what happens is that in a materialistic society where we're always kind of buying and seeking the next thing, you know, once we get bored with something, instead of sticking with it, we move on to whatever the next thing is that's better or offers a better high, so to speak.
Sure. Well, we do that with iPhones. We do that with iPhones, right? You know, all the teenagers in my daughter's school, you know, she's already on me about the latest phone because people don't keep it.
Right.
I mean, it used to be planned obsolescence is why you had to buy something new, and now it's just something new came out, so you have to have it or you're obsolete somehow.
Right, like TVs, exactly right. I mean, the old boob tube TVs lasted for 20 years, but, you know, once all the high-def stuff comes out, everybody's switching gears to buy the new LCD or LED television or whatever. And so, again, you know, there's a right place in all this. But what happens is that when this mentality, this philosophy plays into our relationship, is that we then objectify the other person and we look at them as nothing more than somebody who can gratify our needs. And, you know, when I was in grad school, one of the things I brought up that I thought was really alarming was talking about divorce just being a natural part of the rhythms of life, and this concept of a starter marriage, you know, where it's like you have your first marriage and you kind of learn the kinks, and then you move on to the next one where that's the one that's going to be fulfilling. It's, you know, some of the stuff is just you can see the language, and it's like the starter house, you know, it's like the same thing, and there's lies in all that. There's objectification, the using of the other person, and so, you know, when couples live together, you know, without that commitment, you know, always in the back of your mind, you know, there's that place where you can get out and you can leave. But once you get married, it's different, you know. And so what happens when couples who are living together move in, you know, get married and still adopt those same philosophies and don't shift that gear, that there's no other option but to stay in this. It just, you know, those couples and those relationships end up faltering. And so, yeah, I mean, we can't look to the other just because I want something. You know, we can't look to the other just to gratify our needs and our own selfishness, or, you know, that, you know, they're around just because, you know, they make me feel good, or they may pleasure me sexually, or because what happens when those things fade? I mean, what happens when those things fade? Then you start looking elsewhere, and that's when problems really start emerging.
Yeah, I want to tie that into what I've been hearing as some of the commentary on the Lopez divorce, and that is that they're saying they're bringing comment to the 7-year itch, and they're saying, oh, look, it's, you know, 7 years into marriage, 7-year itch. And I have to say, from all the people that I've known and I've been married 17 years. And so I have to say 7 years was the hard point for us. Anybody I've ever talked to actually have said 7 years is like there's a hump there.
There is.
Were you going to say something about that?
There absolutely is. I mean, studies continually show that most divorces that occur in our country happen between 5 to 7 years. And for myself personally, the same thing, Christina. I've been married almost 9 years, and year 7 was the hardest.
Yeah. It's almost like an invitation.
What's going on? Is it about here?
Yeah, it's almost like an invitation to go deeper, right? Like that. Sometimes that suffering. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What it is that the first 5 to 7 years are the honeymoon stage, where, you know, you're floating on the high of the relationship. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of goodness that's going on, and then, you know, reality sets in. And once you've been with somebody for 5 to 7 years, you see them. You see them in a way
Yes.
that you didn't see them before, and you ask the question like, "Whoa! If I knew this, would I have been married?"
Mm.
And you what do you do with that question? You have to answer that question for yourself. And the church says, like, answer the question, "I will still be married because I see this and I still choose to love you, even when I see your brokenness more clearly."
Mm.
And it's when you make that commitment to really offer yourself and to be committed when the honeymoon has died down, that then a new phase emerges in the relationship and ends up being more fruitful and more beautiful than anything that happened in the first 5 to 7 years.
Wow, I'm so glad that you said that and brought in that there's actually been studies done on this, because I truly believe, at least in my own marriage, that it was due to a grace that was given to me by God to love my husband at a point in our marriage where I think he would even now agree that he was not lovable, and that was the very thing, the point that made him say, "Wow, why is she still loving me now?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think also the gift of our children, it was the thing that solidified and made it harder to walk away from one another. And obviously they have children. The Lopez's, Jennifer Lopez and her husband have children. But I'm saying
Right.
that these are just more of the things that solidify and unite one another to each other, so that we have more reasons to work through that valley that comes, because those valleys come, don't they? And because
They
we're
absolutely do.
we're broken, right? But it seems like without knowing the purpose of things, without understanding that God created us for a reason, and that we were made for a reason, and that love it is part of an emotion. That's like the affect. It's like the gasoline that runs the motorboat. But without your ration and
Right.
your will and the other things to direct it
Yes.
would it be? So it sounds like what
Yes.
you're
Yes.
saying is that if we can help people to understand
Yes.
not just they're made male and female, that was that first aspect, to help communicate and understand the differences, but maybe even love differently than anything they've ever learned about love before, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was around that time, 7 years, that I went to a wedding, a friend's wedding, a good friend of mine's wedding, and I was one of the groomsmen. I was standing at the altar, and so he was expressing his vows. And as he was making the promises, the priest was saying, "Do you promise to be true to her in good times and bad, in sickness and health, till death do you part?" And he said, "I do." As the priest was saying those words, for the first time I recollected I had memories of each of those experiences. I have memories now of loving my wife in richness, not much richness, but loving my wife in richness, of loving my wife in poverty, of loving my
Mm.
wife in the good times, of loving my wife in the bad times, of loving my wife
Oh,
in
beautiful.
the sickness, and in loving my wife in the health.
Oh, and
And
that can be
those
hard.
vows. Those
Yeah.
vows are not just empty words. Once you get to that point, they become memories and experiences.
Yes.
So you say, "Oh
Yes.
my gosh, Lord, I am really living this,
Yes.
and give me the grace to continue to live this
Oh,
till death part."
wow, that's awesome. We've got to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about that third aspect with Mario Sacasa. Stay tuned and join me after the break. Now, hopefully, he's got me on mute right now so that I can talk to you over the break here. Are you with me still?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
Thanks, Christina.